All right, welcome back, dear viewers. Today I have a quick video on encounter tables. Um, was going to do something about the Shadowdark game jam, but there's been plenty of videos done on that already. And frankly, the encounter tables in the Shadowdark book and in other games that I've been seeing lately have been kind of driving me a little batty. I thought I'd make a video on it, but before we get into that, this is what I do. I play games, I record myself playing games, and then I talk about those games. I got nothing against a flip through review, but sometimes I think you don't get anything out of them. I know I don't, and I think a deep dive is helpful. This hobby's expensive, and I'd like you to spend your money wisely. Today's obviously not a deep dive, it's more about, designing encounter tables. So, I am picking on Shadowdark just because everyone's been talking about it. And there are a ton of encounter tables in the book, 22 of them, in fact, with approximately 50 entries each, using a D100 die to roll on them. So that roughly comes out to approximately 2% chance per entry to pop up, roughly. Because some of them, I think, are only have like one number assigned to them, but most of them have two numbers assigned. So anyway, out of the 22 tables, 9 are for the city encounters or settlement encounters. There are only 3 for caves, deep tunnels, and ruins, which I'm kind of surprised by considering what Shadowdark is. And then the remaining are for wilderness encounters. Little disappointed in that, actually. I would have expected more for your caves and whatnot. But here's an example of what you get in the book. This is the artisan district, and if you, as you see, like each entry is to me is more like an event. You know, for example, you roll a 59. An old drunk noble challenges a PC to a duel to the death, right? Or 66 through 67. A shiny object, crocodile eye, glints inside a sewer grate. You know, nothing wrong with those per se, but I kind of want something a little less. To me, these are more like events rather than just an encounter that I can build to the circumstances that the players find themselves at a particular time. You know, an example I use here is a condemned prisoner's news breaks and he scampers away. That's an awesome event that happens in this castle district, right? But how many times are you going to roll that, you know? And the one that I really want to pick on is an old chimera makes its nest among a pile of bones. This is like a cave encounter. Again, great description of an encounter, but that's what you're going to encounter every time you roll a chimera, technically, right? So what if the PCs are in a 5-foot wide hallway? You know, it's kind of like a squeeze of sorts. So they're forced to like go single file. Is the chimera nesting there? It's in the middle of this hallway. Why can't you just tell me they encountered a chimera and then from there I build the encounter? I think that would make more sense, and that's, to me, is more old school play. And Shadowdark. I mean, the procedures are there. That's the thing. Like you can build your own encounter tables. I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. But I'm just not a fan of these events. So, but what do I mean by building an encounter? Well, I mean, an encounter basically has the three elements procedurally, right? You have, are the players surprised? Is the creature surprised? What is the encounter distance? You know, how far away are they? And what is the creature's disposition? You know, that immediate reaction roll. All of that can go in to designing that encounter to make each time you roll chimera unique. You know, if the chimera is surprised, that's going to be a very different encounter versus a chimera that is not surprised and is aggressive. So maybe the chimera is like hunting them, especially if the encounter distance is rather small. That means the chimera got awfully dang close, right? You roll orcs, and the orcs are friendly, right? But they're like maybe far away. That's going to be a very different encounter versus a group of friendly orcs that are surprised and are only like 30 feet away from the players. All of that is how you can make this encounter interesting. And obviously you're going to want to pull from your own appendix N to sort of flesh out the details of the encounter. I sort of feel like the encounter tables in Shadowdark are more like events, and I kind of like the ones that are for settlements, because there's a lot that goes on in a settlement, and so to have something kind of neat like the players are challenged to a duel that can make the mundane walk through the market a little more interesting. And I do think these encounter tables, generally speaking, are really good for solo play, because you don't need to consult the oracle as much, because you have a description of exactly what's happening. But I kind of wish there was something a little bit more, I don't know, basic, so I can build that encounter. And yes, I know I don't have to have the chimera sitting on a pile of bones every time I roll it. I know that. But that's just not how I've ever really seen encounter tables. Up until recently, I guess this is sort of like a more modern thing, and here's an example of the encounter tables that you'd see in the rules cyclopedia. And as you can see, you will roll a d8 to determine, what type of creature you'd be facing, depending on what terrain you're in, right? That's obvious. And then you roll d12 once you find the appropriate class, right, of creature, and then that'll then tell you what the creature is. But as you can see, these are still the same percentage in terms of frequency distribution. Okay, just like in Shadowdark, everything is 2%, right? And here, I'm not going to do the math. I think 8 would be like a 12 point something percent, right? And then 12 would be 8 point something. So that's an equal chance of any of those creatures appearing, basically, right? And then here's an example from a dungeon encounter and the number of appearing. But bell curves are your friend. All right, and this is why I'm not a big fan of the Rule Cyclopedia encounter tables either. I like the fact that they're broken down by creature type, but I think bell curves are useful and in fact necessary when designing encounter tables. When you have that 2d6 roll, for example, or 2d20 or some combination of dice, you're going to get this bell curve. And on the outskirts of the bell curve are going to be less frequent encounters, and then the hump is like where you're going to have most of the types of encounters that are that your players are going to experience. And this is how you can provide some character to some of the locations in your game world. The dungeon, I like to use the Spider Haunt Woods as a typical example of this. I actually wrote a blog on this, and I'll put the link in the description. But if you have like this Spider Haunt Woods and it's got a reputation for having tons of spiders, well, you're going to have spiders appearing more frequently. So you're going to design your bell curve, your encounter table, to have spiders in that hump, whereas in, let's say, the frozen forest 20 miles to the east, maybe there are spiders there, but they're not as frequent, so you put them on the outer edge a little bit. There is a a website, and unfortunately my picture is cutting it off, called alldice.com. It's a great resource. I'll bring it up actually. Let's see. There it is. So as you can see, it gives you the distribution. That is for 3d6, right? But you can do something like, let's see, 2d10, and just calculate, and then there you go. So like rolling a 10, there's a 9% chance of that, a 10% chance of rolling 11, and so on, but only a 1% chance of getting a 2 or a 20. So, if you want dragons in your frozen forest, right, but they're not very frequent, and maybe they should be because they're so tough and rare, you put them in the 2 slot or the 3 slot, or maybe you do 2 to 3, if they're like a 5% chance of running into a dragon. But these encounter tables are how your world is going to have character and have sort of a personality, and you, the game master, can pretty much dictate what's going to happen. Now, that being said, if your implied setting is a bit more gonzo and you have more of these, it's an equal chance for anything to happen, that's fine too. It's just, and I guess that's sort of like the implied setting with Shadowdark, I suppose, right? And I know when I play Mystara with the Rule Cyclopedia, anything can happen when I go out into the wilderness. But when I'm playing a game, let's say like Dark Sun, for example, which uses an encounter system like this, so 1d8 plus a 1d12, there's your distribution, right? You have an 8.33% chance to get a 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13, right? Let me close this out a little bit here, and I'll show you that distribution of Dark Sun. Okay, as you can see, a silt horror or air elemental is an 8.33% chance when you're in the Sea of Silt. If you don't know Dark Sun, it's a very brutal setting, and silt horrors are like terrifying. You do not want to encounter them, but they're very frequent when you're out in the Sea of Silt. That makes sense, right? And if you can see there, you see like things like centipedes, a boulet, or bullet, I don't know how you pronounce that, I guess. Those would be a little bit more frequent, but they're in the Sea of Silt, right? And you just kind of compare, when you are in like the sandy wastes, you're going to see thrycrenes and elves. Kanks are like these giant insects that are used like horses, for example. You're going to see them more often, right? Versus, a spotted lion or a dracolisk, right? And right there's just the two different terrain types. The encounter tables are letting you know, basically what kind of place that is. I mean, the Sea of Silt is very, very dangerous. It's very dangerous. But anyway, so that's not something I wanted to talk about. And if you're going to be designing encounter tables with Shadowdark, maybe consider going to anydice.com and play around with those bell curves, and make something more unique and provide your dungeons and ruins and your hex maps with a little bit more character. But anyway, that's all I got. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please hit like, subscribe, the bell icon, yada yada yada, and I will see you later.